Really, it makes the most sense to hunt vampires during the day. If things get too hairy, you can always just run towards the sun, right? Unless they're the sparkly kind, I guess. Ever since Van Helsing tried to convince a group of young English aristocrats that their weird new Transylvanian neighbor was up to no good in their neighborhood, vampire hunting has been a niche market in the world of the supernatural. From Van Helsing's bookish professor to Blade's choreographed slicing and dicing, hunting those who hunt for blood has evolved a lot over time. Now Jamie Foxx explores a world where vampire hunting is just another job. That still involves an insane amount of action. Let's see what 100 years or so of vampire hunting has led to in Netflix's Day Shift. The transition from stuntman to director can be tricky, but it has also produced some of the most enduring action movies of all time. Director Hal Needham converted his 56 broken bones over the course of his career as the unknown stuntman, who in this case made Burt Reynolds such a star, giving the world Smokey the Bandit, Cannonball Run, and our personal favorite, Megaforce. No? No one's here for the adventures of Ace Hunter and his international peacekeeping force in gold spandex? Maybe that one's just for us. The late stunt driver H.B. Halicki gave us the amazing 1974 Gone in 60 Seconds, with its 40-minute long car chase finale that destroyed a record 127 cars. And the director of The Day Shift, J.J. Perry, has been making a name for himself taking falls and crashing things for stars for a while now, even moving on to second unit director for stunts on franchises like Fast and the Furious and John Wick. Perry joins Needham and Halicki in that transition from stuntman to the director chair and brings his own stunt sensibilities to this very stunt-heavy movie. But Perry didn't just break off on his own to create this throwback buddy cop action horror movie. That's a lot of adjectives. John Wick director Chad Stahelski signed on as a producer on the movie, and Shay Hatton, whose writing credits include Army of the Dead and the upcoming John Wick 4, provided the rewrite of the initial script to bring it more in line with the post-John Wick aesthetic, which as we all know involves a lot of ballet-like violence and fancy gun action. As you'd expect from someone who makes their living by really falling from buildings or really being yanked from walls to create the pulse-pounding sequences in action films, Perry came down hard on the side of practical effects when it came to making Day Shift. This included involving the actors in the stunts as frequently as possible, at least for the safer stunts. The result is a movie with very little digital touch-up, and most of that is to get rid of the cable that pulled the old lady through the wall and into the shower. It also involved a fair amount of set building and then set destroying. But what's the fun of a set unless you get to destroy it in dramatic fashion? There still is a bit of disconnect when it comes to practical effects depicting impractical things like, I don't know, vampires with evil real estate schemes. Paige the Vampire apparently went to the cinematic Lex Luthor school of evil villainy, where the evil plan is ultimately real estate. Eliminate the West Coast so that his inland property will suddenly be beachfront. Use kryptonite to create an island so that he can be the first to claim it for its property values. That man Lex loves his overly elaborate real estate scams. To get that otherworldly we're fighting vampires feel without having to round up the last 4 VFX artists not being ragged down by Marvel, they instead found another way. During the shutdown, performers like those from the Cirque du Soleil weren't allowed to put on shows. But fortunately, with some COVID protocols, the Contortionists were able to lend their bendy skills to portray the unnaturally bendy vampires. While a fresh take on the vampire hunting genre, Day Shift also acts as a bit of a callback to the movies of Perry's youth. Movies like The Evil Dead, Lost Boys, and particularly Fright Night were the movies he looked to for inspiration on how to bring this movie to life. From watching those movies, he determined that the 3 elements that needed to be balanced were action, humor, and of course, horror. Is a movie really set in Los Angeles if it doesn't involve Snoop Dogg in some capacity? I mean, probably, but why bother? Snoop Dogg has pretty much made his own small industry out of guest appearances and cameos over the years. When it came to casting the character Big John Elliott, Perry only had one person in mind: Calvin Broadus. Now, it may seem like a middling distinction to make between Calvin Broadus and Snoop Dogg, seeing as they're one and the same, but Perry was adamant, telling the rap legend and notable friend of Martha Stewart that he didn't want the persona of Snoop Dogg to play the role of Big John, but that he was looking for Calvin Broadus to give him a performance as Calvin Broadus. Even so, I'm not quite sure that there's a big difference between the Snoop Dogg persona and Calvin Broadus. Part of the reason that Perry needed Broadus instead of Snoop is that the character wasn't necessarily written as a Snoop Dogg character. Big John was based on Perry's platoon sergeant from his military days. Both Perry and Snoop are children of Vietnam War vets. That helped them bond and connect to create the character of Big John. He told Vanity Fair, "I had a sergeant in the army who looked just like Calvin Broadus. He was tall and super wise. He was a mentor to me, a father figure. His name was Sergeant Cobb. He was really just a gem of a human that always had our backs and led by example." Sergeant Cobb wasn't the only personal element that Perry drew from. Regarding Jamie Foxx's character Bud Jablowski, he told Vanity Fair, "I made Jamie's character as much like me as I could. He's an army guy. I was an infantryman. He came to LA and he's a guy that gets in over his head, a lot like I do, but he has to be able to get himself out of trouble. I have a 9-year-old daughter, he has a 9-year-old daughter. He's trying hard to keep his family together, and you know, times are tough." Sometimes it's easy to forget that people who have fans can themselves be fans of other things. For example, Ice-T is not only a legendary rapper, but is also such a big video game fan that he does unboxing videos for games like Gears of War and Call of Duty on top of lending his vocal talents. For Snoop Dogg, the horror genre was a perfect fit. He has previously appeared in the horror anthology film Hood of Horror as the host and as the title character of Bones, about a gambler that returns from the dead for revenge. No one ever returns from the dead just because they forgot to tell you where they left Action Comics #1 or something. It's always revenge with these returning spirits. But when it comes to vampires, Snoop has a favorite, the series True Blood. He's such a big fan of the series that he recorded a song about Anna Paquin's character Sookie called, of course, Oh Sookie. You'd think that merited a cameo appearance, but alas, it never happened. So instead, Snoop is cleaning LA of vampires. Not a bad trade-off if you ask me. One of the weird conceits of zombie movies is that they have to exist in realities where there's no such thing as zombie movies. So you get characters that'll call them anything but zombies. Part of that is a function of the modern zombie as we know it comes from George Romero, with the legendary Haitian zombie being something else. Mostly not part of a horde that forces the remaining members of humanity in the shopping malls. Luckily, vampire movies don't have that problem, and as a result, this vampire movie is very referential to the vampire stories of our time, including Twilight. Bud's reluctant sidekick in the buddy cop portion of the movie is named Seth, played by Dave Franco. Seth is more than happy to be a bureaucrat in the Union of Vampire Slayers, but is forced to accompany Bud for that by the book / by the seat of their pants buddy cop dynamic. Part of that is Seth being a fan of the Twilight movies, with him even trying to defend the final movie of the series. Not wanting to mess up a reference, and boy do I know that feeling, Franco brushed up on the Twilight series to make sure he got it all right. But it's like a 40-second scene. You think Franco just needed cover to watch Twilight? For the evil vampire by night, evil real estate spectator by day role of Paige or Andrea Sanfernado, actress Karla Souza went for a pretty straightforward source of inspiration: The Lost Boys. Kiefer Sutherland and his gang made 80s vampires so cool we forget the movie was a vehicle for the Coreys, or that there was such a thing as the Coreys, made up of Corey Haim and Corey Feldman. It even made shirtless Saxman cool. That's Tim Capello if you're nostalgic for some smooth 80s sax solos. It wasn't just the classic cool of the Lost Boys that Souza brought to the role. Just like Foxx, Franco, and Snoop, she enjoyed the action as well, especially as the final boss monster of the movie. Pages have been written and videos have been made about the trope of putting women in high heels in action scenarios. But sometimes it's just narratively unavoidable when you have a character that has to go back and forth between billboard-worthy real estate agent to bloodthirsty leader of the San Fernando Valley vampire scene. The hills did prove difficult when Souza needed to run along the concrete that wasn't really concrete, because the stunt performers were meant to land on it hard. So it looked like concrete but behaved like a gym floor. To make it happen, Souza requested that she break the heels off her shoes to make the run easier, and he agreed. Heelless heels still seem like they'd be hard to run in though. When you're Oscar winner Jamie Foxx and you sign on a movie, you get to make a lot of requests. When it came to the role of Seth, Foxx had a specific request for an actor he had been keeping an eye on for years and wanted to work with. That of course being James Franco's kid brother, Dave Franco, who had already made appearances in movies like Superbad and 21 Jump Street. There was another handy connection with director Perry looking to the original Fright Night as inspiration, as Franco appeared in the 2011 remake of that movie. Jamie Foxx has a lot of talents, including music. That flair for music made its way into the movie a bit spontaneously. Once Seth had warmed up to the idea of getting out from behind the desk and in the field taking down vampires, he says the line, hunting down vamps with my best friend Bud. Between takes, Foxx had Franco record that line with a specific cadence. He took that recording and sent it to his music producer with a rough concept for what he wanted behind it, and by the end of the day, Foxx had a version of the new song Hunting Down Vamps with my best friend Bud, and they now have plans on making and releasing a music video for it. While the whole movie is inspired by the action horror comedies of the 80s, there are a few specific nods to the movies Perry grew up on. When the grandma in the opening scene is injured fighting Bud, she connects with her inner Deadite and vomits an otherworldly amount of blood and bile all over the vampire hunter. And the quintessential modern vampire series Blade gets a call out when a non-union vampire tooth dealer evaluates one of Bud's vampire hunting contraptions. Every proper vampire movie needs its vampire lore. Stories like Interview with a Vampire and the tabletop role-playing game Vampire the Gathering have explored the idea that if you're a nearly immortal group of secret nighttime bloodsuckers, you'll eventually start forming social groups and even rules and structures. Day Shift has its own lore that is hinted at over the course of the movie, but it's only when noticing that the order is messed up that the heroes let us know that there's a lot more than we know going on in the vampire world. For Day Shift, there are 5 vampire types: Uber Vamps, Eastern Vamps, Southern Vamps, Spider Vamps, and Juvie Vamps. We learned that Juvies are people who are turned when they're young and aren't able to regenerate, so they end up resembling zombies after a while. This is revealed when Bud tracks a nest of Juvies at an animal shelter where they reside because Juvies can't hunt for humans. The other group we learn about is the Uber Vamps, whose main distinction is that they can survive being beheaded, which turns out to be good news once Seth becomes a vampire who is almost immediately beheaded by his best friend Bud. Another vampire slayer has had to deal with Uber Vamps, and that would be Buffy the Vampire Slayer. In Buffy's world, these vampires were the oldest of the old and the ones that even other vampires feared. The movie doesn't tell us anything about spider vamps, though we can probably deduce that they're the ones crawling around in weird contortions out of air vents and stuff, nor eastern or southern vamps. For southern vamps though, we might be able to ask Snoop, since the name for the book series True Blood is based on is the Southern Vampire Mysteries. Names are often hard to come up with, especially if you have to come up with a lot of them and they don't matter. Sometimes when they don't matter, it's harder. So art departments and effects teams like to throw in either inside references or overt references. There are some name references on the Vampire Hunters activity board that range from real stretches to a clear nod. From stretches to certainty, they are: C. Johnson could be Chris Johnson, who played Logan Fell on Vampire Diaries for 5 episodes. There's a Ruggiero, which is also the name of a stunt performer on Vampire's Assistant. Given the volume of stunt talent though, it's still a bit of a stretch. Getting closer, Kay Olsen could refer to the author Kiki Olsen, who wrote How to Win a Date with a Vampire. The one that is certain though is Jay Mastny, which happens to be the name of the lead man of the art department. Another one that might be a stretch comes from the pair of Armenian brothers out of Glendale who hunt vampires under the guise of their home audio business. These are the Nazarian brothers. Their last names could be a nod to the author Vera Nazarian, who wrote Vampires Are From Venus, Werewolves Are From Mars. Their last names could also be referencing a vampire myth that the creatures were created by someone ingesting the actual blood of Christ during crucifixion, with Jesus sometimes being referred to as Nazarene. But most likely it's just a very common Armenian name. Souza's page talks about how vampires were once worshipped on the spot where they stand while she's laying out her evil plan to drive up housing prices in Los Angeles and secure homes for their kind. Later, when she's beneath the development, there are carvings on the wall similar to Mesoamerican nations like the Aztecs. While we may think of vampires as an Eastern European thing, there are vampire-like figures in the lore of the Aztecs. Cihuatateo is created when a woman dies in childbirth, which is a part of the reason women who die in childbirth were considered warriors. The other part is that the whole process looks super painful. They get 5 nights a year to come back to Earth and feed on lost children or mate with men to create more Cihuatateo. Some thought that if they created a big enough feast for them, they'd lose track of time and be destroyed by the sun. When Paige said that they were worshipped like gods, she might have been alluding to Tlaltecuhtli, the creation goddess with some vampiric traits that she shares with the Cihuatateo, Coatlicue, Cihuacoatl, and its Papaloto. Having built the valley on top of a temple to a vampiric deity would certainly explain Highway 101. If you're a stunt performer and second unit director for something as crazy as Fast 9, you gotta include a car chase. Clearly he's thought about the best car to bring to a car chase because we both came to the same conclusion. a trophy truck. Built for desert racing with upwards of 1100 horsepower, it's the perfect henchman ride. You don't want to get stuck on the motorcycles, those guys never make it. The chase takes place in the world capital of crazy car chases, the LA River, which is actually a canal that rarely ever has water in it. So everything from Grease, To Live and Die in LA, Point Blank, To Drive, Terminator 2, and the remake of Gone in 60 Seconds has been filmed in this canal. Since we're in the franchise era, the filmmakers already have plans and ideas for a series of movies set in the day shift universe, including the obvious next step of the night shift, or as Perry suggested, the graveyard shift. Get it? Graveyards, vampires? You get it.